Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Bella DePaulo. She is the leading expert on single life. She actually coined the term single at heart. And today we're going to talk exactly about that because we're focusing on her latest book, Single at Heart, The Power, Freedom, and Heart-Feeling Joy of Single Life. So, Dr. DePaulo, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let me start by asking you this. We're going to talk about who these single at heart people are. But first of all, is your book about people who are just temporarily single, single for life, both? And it's about them and also for them. I mean, what exactly is
Yeah.
going on here?
Okay. So the book is about people who are single at heart, and they are people who love being single and want to stay single. For them, and I'm one of them, single life is our best life. So it's our most meaningful, fulfilling, authentic, joyful, and psychologically rich life. People who are single at heart are happy and flourishing because they're single, not in spite of it. So the book is mostly about them, but lots of people don't realize that single life is their best life until they've tried several romantic relationships, maybe even several marriages, and realize that even if they are in a relationship with someone they love and who loves them back, it just doesn't feel right. And so, they might have spent a lot of their lives not being single, and the book is for them. And it is also even for people who are single and maybe don't want to stay single, but they're curious about what it's like to flourish when single. Or it's also for the parents and maybe even some friends and family of single people who have this single person in their life, their son or daughter, if it's parents or a relative or friend, who doesn't seem like they want to get married or even be in a romantic relationship. And maybe they're really worried about them. And if they read this book, they might realize maybe there's nothing to be worried about. Maybe they're living a great life.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the reason why I asked you if this book is also for people who are temporarily single, but not
Mhm,
necessarily single at heart or don't want to be
mhm.
single for the rest of their lives. Because, and we're
Sure.
going to get more into this point, but I guess that it's safe to say that one of the points you want to drive home with your book is that even if you are temporarily single and want to look for another relationship, it's
Mhm.
not the end of the world if you are single for a few months, even a few years, because
Right.
there's many things that are valuable that you can do
Yes.
with your life, and that happens to a ton of people, right?
Yes, for sure. In fact, it's best not to think of it as, oh, poor me, I'm single, but oh, let me think about the opportunities I have here to do things I like to do, maybe especially things I might not do once I find my romantic partner. It's an opportunity to spend as much time with your friends or anyone else that you like being with or are caring for without worrying that some romantic partner thinks that more of that time belongs to them. So it is a great opportunity.
By the way, do single at heart people also include people who are actually never actively looking for a new partner, but they just never completely close themselves to the possibility of falling in love with someone if that happens?
I think that the people you are describing now are what Sasha Kagan calls quirky alone, which is that they truly appreciate their single lives, but they're open to someone who meets their very high standards. So they're not going to be in a romantic relationship just to be in a romantic relationship, but they are interested.
And I mean, do we have any idea at all about how many single at heart people are out there? I mean, do we have good
Yeah.
statistics on that?
It's really hard to tell because it's not a concept that's out there. So most people don't have never heard of this. They don't realize that there's such a thing as loving being single and wanting to stay single. But I can give you some estimates. Um, I have an online quiz called Are You Single at Heart? It's also in the book. And more than 20,000 people from 100 nations, more than 100 nations, have taken it. And 29% of them identify as clearly single at heart. But it's not a representative sample. It's just people who find out about the quiz and take it. So another estimate comes from a study of thousands of German adults who are solo singles. So they don't have a romantic partner, they're not married, they're not cohabiting. And of those, 21% say they don't want a romantic partner. So I think, the numbers are going to be substantial, but we won't really know what they are until the idea becomes more widely known and people realize that this wanting to stay single for positive reasons because you appreciate all that single life has to offer is a really good thing. And once that way of about it gets out there, then more people will understand themselves that way, and they won't feel, as many do now, that they can't really admit that they love being single and want to stay single because people think there's something wrong with you if that's how you feel.
By the way, you mentioned the quiz you have in your book. How can
Yeah.
one find out that they are single at heart?
Oh, you can take the quiz, and there's a answer key at the end of it. So you can either find it in my book or online. Another thing is even better is to read my Single at Heart book and see how much you identify with the stories of people who are single at heart.
And what tend to be the psychological traits of people who are single at heart? Do they have particular psychological traits or no?
Yeah, people who are single at heart really care about authenticity. So they want to be their true selves. They want to live a life that reflects who they really are rather than just doing what they're expected to do, what everyone thinks you should do. And with that comes a certain level of confidence because to go against the grain, you do need to have some confidence in yourself. There are also studies showing that people who enjoy spending time alone, which the single at heart do, are more open to experiences. They're less likely to be neurotic. So it's a very positive psychological profile.
Actually, about that, I wanted to ask you because since we have, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in our conversation, but since we have this sort of norm across virtually all societies that tells us that people should want to be coupled, should want to have a
Mm,
partner, should want to have a romantic
yeah.
relationship, be married, and so on,
Mhm.
it's very easy for us to pathologize people who just say that they don't want any of that, they're not interested in that. And for example,
Yeah.
I would imagine that many,
Mm.
even clinical psychologists, would say that, for example, someone who claims that has, for
Mm.
example, an avoidant attachment style or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
mean that perhaps is not necessarily the case, right? Probably there's nothing
Correct.
psychologically wrong with them.
Yeah, in fact, they may be pictures of psychological health because they have the confidence to live their best life rather than just following the crowd. There of single people who are avoidantly attached, I think they are more likely to be the single people who don't want to be single. So the single at heart are not people who are running away from romantic relationships because they don't like them or they've been burned or they have issues. They're people who are drawn to single life in very positive ways because they like the freedom it offers them. They like the opportunity to be themselves. They like the opportunity to spend time alone and to value all different kinds of people rather than just putting one person, a romantic partner, the center of your life.
And is being single at heart something that is in any way innate, or is it something that
Yeah.
people develop? Do we have any idea about that?
Yeah. There's no really good research on that yet, but my impression from all the work I've done and the interviews and so forth is that being single at heart is something more than a lifestyle. So people who are single at heart are powerfully drawn to single life. That's what really feels comfortable, authentic, and true. So whether it's innate, I don't know if I can go that extra step, but it's certainly more than just, oh, I think I'll be single for a while.
So it's probably, if not innate, at least there's a strong psychological predisposition for that.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And are there any gender differences here? I mean, is it more common among men
Ah,
than women or vice versa?
yes, this is surprising to a lot of people, including myself. Um, generally, if you look at single people in general, women usually do better at being single. They're better at cultivating friendships and they know how to do all the household chores and all that. So they're good at it. But when you look at this subset of single people, the ones who are single at heart, who love being single and are powerfully drawn to that life, there are a few more men than women. I mean, there are substantial numbers of men and women, but it actually tilts a little towards more for the men. And when you think about being at heart, like it's people who like their freedom, they like getting to be the deciders, they like, it makes sense in a way, but it wasn't something I anticipated.
And what kinds of opportunities does singlehood offer people?
Yeah, the main thing is to um, follow your heart and get to do whatever it is, within the limits of your resources and opportunities that you find fulfilling. And that might mean pursuing opportunities to learn and grow, like pursuing your education or unique experiences or travel. It could mean, for some people, it means um, be there for the people who need you. It could include being there for your communities and your nation. It could mean um, creating your own path through life. So rather than the standard, I'm going to meet someone and move in and get married and have kids, you create your own life path. It could mean um, this surprised me a little bit too, choosing meaningful work rather than work that pays a lot if you can't have both. Now, you can't do that the whole time. I mean, you have to pay your bills, and you don't, as a single person, you don't have a spouse or, partner to be a financial backstop. So you got to do something. But beyond that, single at heart people like doing meaningful work. It might mean reimagining holidays so that you spend them in unique ways that are special to you. There's just the big picture is you live your life in accordance with your interests and values and passions without being bandied about by the wishes or needs or interests of a partner. Now, I'm saying that you can have a partner who's not at all controlling and still what they like to do, what they like to eat, where they like to go, that kind of influences you. And I think a really interesting example of that happens when people are married for a long time and then they are divorced or widowed. And at first, that can be a really crushing experience. But over time, some people find that single life is really fulfilling and they start to learn things about themselves. And it's almost like coming home to themselves.
One particular thing that really bothers me, hearing people, I mean, sometimes reacting to when they hear certain people that are single saying that they don't want a partner because they just want to wake up in the weekend, wherever time they want, go to bed wherever time they want, do
Yeah.
wherever they want without
Yeah.
having to tell anything to anybody. I mean, they just
Yeah.
organize their day the way they want. Sometimes people react to that and say, "Oh, you just want to avoid responsibility." But I mean, that doesn't make much
That's not
sense,
true.
right? Because actually,
Yeah.
you're even more responsible for your own
Mhm.
life because you have to
Yes.
decide on your own what to do, when to do, and
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if something bad happens, you have no one to complain to. I mean, no one to say their. I mean, it's their fault. It's your own fault in a sense, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't say they don't have anyone because often they have more friends, more different people in their
Yeah,
lives.
yeah,
But I
sure.
but I see what your point is there. Yeah, I mean they are, they're in charge of their own life. So the
Mhm.
good part about that is they get to decide and do what they want and have a life they want. But the downside is that they have to cover everything, right? So they've got to pay all their own
Yeah.
bills and, do all the chores that a couple might split up between them. And so there's that. But even that, the thing about all the different chores and, who takes care of the finances and who takes care of the car and who does the dishes and who does the laundry, even all of that, it can be a positive in the long run for people who stay single because they either learn how to do all those things themselves or they figure out how to find someone to help or to hire. And what that means is when they get to later life, and some people who were married or had a close romantic live in relationship, when that ends by divorce or widowhood, they either don't know how to do the things their partner used to do or they're out of practice. And at a time that can already be very difficult, putting on top of that, having to learn or relearn how to do these tasks of everyday life can make it even harder. And meanwhile, the single people who have been single all their lives are just, going along, doing what they've learned to do a long time ago.
So I guess that one very common question or thing that people would worry about when it comes to singlehood is solitude. So is that
Mhm.
something that single at heart people experience a lot? And if so, how do they deal with that?
Yes, this is something else that surprised me. So I really enjoy the time I have to myself. I crave it. I would not be a happy person if I had to be around people all the time, although I like being with other people, just not all the time. And so I figured once I did my research, I'd find that people who are single at heart so kind of like their solitude. What I did not anticipate is that of the people who told me their life stories, every one of them said that they loved having time to themselves. 3 people said it was like breathing. And so that was something that was surprising. And that is another strength of people who are single at heart. I actually think of it like a superpower because if you are comfortable on your own, spending time on your own, you're very unlikely to feel lonely. And this love of being on your own has gotten the single at heart through the pandemic, the worst of it. And it also means that as we grow older, I'm already 70, so I'm getting there. As we grow older, we are very unlikely to be the caricature of an old single person who's isolated and lonely. We're unlikely to be lonely because we like our time alone, and we're unlikely to be lonely because we pay attention to and nurture our ties to whatever people we value without making our lives all about one person.
Mhm. By the way, about not making our lives about just one person, what other kinds of relationships can single at heart people devote themselves to?
Oh, well, many of them have close friendships. Many have relatives that they care a lot about. They might have mentors, colleagues, teammates, etc. And some people who are single at heart do have romantic relationships, but they don't want to put that partner the center of their life. So
Mhm.
they don't want to do what sometimes is called riding the romantic relationship escalator. You start with dating, and then maybe you date steadily, and maybe you move in together and get married, and maybe you have kids and all the rest. Instead, they want to um, have these relationships more casually. And they're very upfront about it, so no one's getting tricked or manipulated.
And do lots of single at heart people feel the need to have kids?
This too. People who are single at heart are less likely to have kids than
Mm.
those who are not single at heart. But many people who are single at heart do have kids. And rather than telling these tales of woe that you hear so much about, oh, those poor single parents, they often describe a special bond with their children, and they feel that their children have some advantages. So they are never going to be caught in a battle between their parents. They're not going to be in a household with parents who are at each other's throats or treating each other coldly, giving them the silent treatment and so forth. So they tell very positive stories about having children.
And I mean, on the point of solitude and sometimes feeling lonely, isn't it also the case that even partnered people can also sometimes feel lonely, even if they are with
Yes.
another person?
Yes. In fact, anecdotally, I've heard several times that people say that the loneliest feeling is feeling alone when you're with a romantic
Mhm.
partner. Because here's this person who's been held up to you as the answer to loneliness. It's supposed to protect you from that. So when you have that and you still feel lonely, it's a very painful kind of loneliness.
And I mean, in terms of life outcomes, because that's something that many people care about, and there's some studies out there that people have
Mhm.
run for decades about what
Right.
people need in life for them to be psychologically healthy, for them to experience well-being and have good life outcomes. How do lifelong single people compare to coupled people when it comes to
Yeah.
that?
Well, you know what usually happens, and if you've heard over and over again, oh, married people do better than single people. That is a comparison based on what I call the cheater technique. So you take people who are currently married and you compare them to people who are currently single. And if the married people are doing better, you say, ha ha, look at that. Marriage makes people happier. Wow, you are ignoring all the people who got married and got divorced. And they didn't get divorced because they were so happily married. And that could be as many as, maybe 43%. So it's a huge number. If you want to know if marriage um, makes people happier, you can't really know that. Saying it makes people happier is a causal statement, which is hard to demonstrate because you can't randomly assign people to be married or single. But what you can do, which is a close approximation, not perfect, is to follow the same people over the course of their adult lives and ask them every year, how happy are you? How happy are you? How happy are you? And keep track of whether they're single or married. And there have been well over a dozen studies like this that go on for years and include thousands of people. And what they typically find is that couples who get married, um, feel a little happier around the time of the wedding. It's a very exciting time. Everybody's giving them presents and congratulating them. But then after a while, they go back to being as happy or as unhappy as they were when they were single. And very importantly, that um, that period of happiness at the beginning, researchers sometimes call it the honeymoon effect. That only happens for people who get married and stay married. For people who eventually divorce, and the researchers know this because they have data on them for years and years and years. So the people who eventually divorce were already getting a little less happy as their wedding day approached, instead of getting more happy, which is what typically happens with people who get married and stay married. Now, I should also say that every social science study is based on averages.
Mhm.
So I'm describing the average findings, and there are always exceptions.
Right. And I mean, since we're also talking about marriage, something that came to mind right now, I mean, I was thinking about people who we are obviously always, I mean, not always, but very commonly in contact with that are actually single at heart, people like priests, like monks, like, I don't know, there are even
Oh,
political
yeah,
activists that just
right,
dedicate themselves to
right.
their political
Mhm.
activities, people who
Mhm.
do volunteer work that, I mean, just are interested in
Right.
those kinds of things. And I mean, those are all meaningful ways of living that no one would question,
Yes,
right?
for sure. Yes.
So, and are there, in terms of life outcomes, are there particular differences between people who are reluctantly single and the ones that are really single at heart?
Yes. So people who are single at heart are more likely to be happy than people who are not single at heart because they have what they want. They want to be single and they are single. They also are especially likely to get happier and happier as they grow older, which is contrary to the stereotype of single people, those poor single people, and they're just going to get sadder and lonelier as they grow older. Well, no. Another thing is that people who want to be single tend to invest in their friends. So they take their friendships more seriously, they value them more. And it's a virtuous cycle where the more they value their friends, the happier they are with their single lives, and the happier they are with their single lives, the more they value their friends. And people who are single at heart are also protected from the painful experience of single people who don't want to be single, of what's called ambiguous loss. And that means, they don't know if they're ever going to get what they want. So they're in this ambiguous space where they might get the life they want or they might not.
And do you think that single people are victims of discrimination in society?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. In the United States, for example, there are hundreds of laws that benefit and protect only people who are legally married. So
Mhm.
that's a big one. And it's not just in the United States. There are also policies and practices that favor married people. So, for example, in some workplaces, um, single people are expected to cover for married people if they want to leave early or if they want to be with their spouse for some reason. And excuse me. And there are also ways that the people in the lives of married people are valued and favored. So, for example, in the United States, we have what's called Family and Medical Leave Act. And that means you can take time off to care for someone who needs help if that person is your parent, your child, or your spouse.
Mhm.
Single people can take time off for their parent or their child if they have one, but they don't have anyone in the spouse slot. So I can't take time off under this law to care for a close friend or a sibling or, someone else I really care about. Or maybe there's someone I'm not that close to, but I want to be there for them because I care about them. And I can't do that. And none of those people can take time off to care for me.
This is actually something very negative in terms of politics, policy-wise, because since we tend to cater our policies to couples and families, I mean, there are many
Yeah.
single people out there that when they get older, I mean, they will experience some, I mean, negative things, some hardships. It's not their own fault, but just the
Mhm.
way society is
Oh,
structured, right?
sure, sure. In the United States, the healthcare system is very focused on conventional families. So you might, a hospital might require that you have a ride back from a procedure. Let's say you go in as an inpatient for a procedure where there might be some anesthesia. Well, they will require that you have somebody to take you home and they won't let you use a taxi or an Uber or something like that. Well, that's kind of assuming that, you have a spouse who's going to be available and pick you up. And even people who are married don't always have a spouse who's available. So it's very geared toward um, a conventional model that most people are not even living in anymore. So in the United States, if you were to knock on doors at random, you would more often be met with a single person living alone than a household of mom, dad, and the kids.
So I guess that the sort of discrimination we've just talked about already points to at least one aspect of this next question. But why do you think it is so hard for many single people to realize that it is fine, it is okay for them to stay single?
Oh, yeah. Well, it starts with the way that single people are viewed, our conventional wisdom, which of course is not very wise, that insists that um, it's not natural or normal to stay single or to want to be single. And that's just not even questioned. So if that's the kind of worldview you're exposed to, it makes it hard to understand that single life can be your best life. Also, um, think about who is celebrated, who's respected. It's, of course, people who get married or get into romantic relationships. And think about movies, TV shows, song lyrics, novels. They all disproportionately celebrate people who become romantically coupled. I mean, where do you ever find a single character who loves being single and wants to stay single and is not stigmatized for it? Well, you don't even find them at all, much less how people react to them. So it's just, it's just not out there. And that results in something that's really amazing, which is that people who love their single life, some people who love their single life, um, come to doubt themselves. So they think, I love being single. I wonder if there's something wrong with me. How ridiculous is that? That you have what so many people crave, a life that you love. And instead of feeling proud, you're thinking, oh, what's wrong with me that I have this life that I love because it's a single life? And I am trying to, with my Single at Heart book and my other writings and talks, really push back on that.
Well, I guess that everyone who has some traits that fall outside of the norm experience some of that to some extent. I mean, they
Yeah.
sometimes question themselves if they question if they are normal
Yes,
or not, if there's
of
something wrong with
course.
them. I mean, it's not only
Yeah,
in the case of
yeah.
single people, but I mean, that's there all the time, right?
Oh, sure. And so, for example, people who are not heterosexual have
Hmm.
been stigmatized for a very long time and still
Right.
are to some extent.
Hmm.
But there is much more awareness that
Yeah.
being not heterosexual and all its many varieties of not being so uh, is not something to be worried about or self-conscious about, but rather it can be, very fulfilling life and the best life for people who embrace it. And that's something that single people, regardless of their sexual or gender orientation or identity, don't have yet. I mean, my Single at Heart book, I hope, is pushing us toward that. But we really lag behind in cultural consciousness, social justice movements, and so forth.
But I mean, where do you think that the social stigma against chronically single people stems from? I mean, at a certain point there, you mentioned, for example, movies and other forms of
Mhm.
art and artistic expressions
Right.
where we see all the
Yes.
time that the hero or the main character always has to fall in love
Yes.
with someone and want to have a partner. But apart from that, do you think that perhaps I mean, and of course, I don't want to reduce everything to that, but since even biologically speaking, we are a sexually reproducing species, that perhaps it has anything to do with that.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, but you can have sex without being married. So,
Yeah.
um, and also, I think another big part of that, of the stigmatizing of single people, again. comes from our worldviews. So lots of people want to believe that if you just find that one person, commit to that person, that you really will live happily ever after, that that's not a fairy tale. It's truth that once you find that person, all the pieces of your life fall in place. And now you have your sexual partner and your confidant and your co-financial manager and your co-parent if you have kids and all the rest. And that can be a very seductive promise, find this one person and you're done. And also people really believe that that is the one true path to happiness and fulfillment. And they want to believe that. So single people who stay single are stigmatized because they threaten that worldview. And the single people, several studies have shown, who are especially likely to be put down are the single people who like being single. And again, single people who want to stay single, who like being single, are threatening that worldview that there's one royal route to happiness, and it's through romantic coupling.
And by the way, I would imagine that this sort of stigma would extend to people who just are not particularly interested in committed relationships, but want, for example, casual relationships,
Mhm.
casual sex, short-term
Yes,
relationships,
yes.
and all of that.
Yes, I think that they are subject to um, stigma or at least harsh judgments.
And by the way, about that, about sex, do I mean, what do the sex lives of single at heart people look like? I mean, are
Yeah,
at least some of them having sex, even if it's
yeah,
just
right.
casual or not?
Yes. Yes. So it's a whole variety of things. Some have friends with benefits. Some get together casually and they make sure their partners know about it. Some don't have sex and don't want it. So it really is the whole gamut. One person told me about being in college. When she was in college, she had hookups, and those are often, considered bad by some of the people who are pundits. But she said that she loved that because her sex life was compartmentalized. So she had this sex life, but then it didn't interfere with the rest of her life. So it didn't mean that she felt obligated to do stuff with her partner. She got to do all the other things in college she loved doing, like focus on her courses or her friends or her interests.
So, how do you react, still talking about sex, how do you react to uh, some of those statistics that sometimes we come across about the percentage of mostly young adults that have gone without sex for a year or more and
Right,
so on?
right.
Because usually people get really worried about that. But do you think that perhaps those statistics alone are not informative enough because maybe, just maybe, some of these people are even not that interested in sex to begin with.
Exactly, exactly. So it's worrisome if the people really do want sex and they're not
Mhm.
getting it.
Sure.
But one way it's good is if these statistics mean that more and more people who don't want to have sex no longer feel as much pressure to have sex, or people who don't want to have sex as often don't feel as pressured. And you can see that happening in a way through the growth of the asexuality movement, where people who are not attracted to particular other people um, come out as asexual, and they
Mhm.
have a lot of social support from other asexuals, and there's a social movement about it. So that helps. But another thing to keep in mind is that um, attitudes towards sex are important in shaping how people feel about having sex or not having sex.
Mhm.
So when it is so valued and celebrated, that makes people who don't have sex um, feel badly about themselves when, if we were a little more realistic about it, maybe there would be a little less pain for people who are not having sex but wish they were.
Sometimes it crosses my mind how society would look like in terms of how we think about sex and sexless people if
Mhm.
we just thought, if we didn't make a big deal of it, if we just thought that, I mean, if you have sex, if you don't have sex, whatever, it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal. I mean, if you want to have
Yeah,
sex, okay, then
yeah,
that's perhaps
right.
something negative. But if
Yes.
you don't want to have, or if you do not have it, whatever. I mean,
Ye-
I just sometimes I just imagine how people would feel much, much better with themselves if they
Yes.
didn't have that kind of social pressure and if they were not ashamed of telling other people that they haven't
Yes.
had sex for a while.
Correct. You're describing a societal ideal in my mind.
So, do you think that your book also ties in any way to some other changes in people's ways of partnering that we have seen raising over the past few decades with the decline of marriage, for example?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. So I think the rise of the single at heart and people who like being single goes along with the increasing valuing of friendship. I think people are starting to take their friends more seriously and valuing them more. It also goes along with um, different ways of living that we're seeing now. For example, couples who are committed to each other, but don't want to live in the same place. It's sometimes called living apart together. It's also relevant, I think, to other ways of living. For example, people who live in co-housing communities where everyone has their own house or apartment, and inside the house or apartment might be any combination of people that you'd find anywhere, a solo person or a couple or two friends or whatever. But a co-housing community is a community, so they deliberately want to have social interaction with each other. There's usually a common house where they can meet for meals if they want to. The common house often has um, washers and dryers, so everyone doesn't have it in their house and they meet each other there. And there are rooms for pursuing interests like um, maybe musical interests or art or whatever. And so that too is consistent with the development of different ways of living, of more open-mindedness about how we can live, who we can value, and how to organize a life.
Do you think that there are things in your book that even people who are interested in romantic relationships and are at the moment in
Yeah.
romantic relationships can bring into their own relationships that perhaps would help them deal with some, I don't know, negative aspects of them?
Right. I think that if more people became familiar with my Single at Heart book, which I'm going to show you now, if that's okay. This is it. Oops. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, I
Anyway,
can.
okay. Couldn't resist. That I think couples would do better because they would understand that if somebody wants some space, it's not necessarily criticism of their partner. It could mean they could understand that if somebody wants to spend time with their friends apart from their partner, that's not necessarily a criticism of their partner. So I think it opens the door to a more generous and less envious or suspicious kind of interaction.
So, just one last question then. What would be perhaps a message that you would have for people out there that are currently single and perhaps they experience all of these kinds of social pressures that we've talked about here, and they are perhaps not sure if they are actually single at heart or not,
Mhm.
but perhaps they at least want to try to go through this period of their lives as smoothly as possible.
Yes, I would tell them to live their single years fully, joyfully, and unapologetically.
Okay, so that's a great note to end on. And the book is again Single at Heart: The Power, Freedom, and Heart-Filling Joy of Single Life. I'm leaving a link to it in the description of the interview. And Dr. DePaulo, would you like to tell people where they can find you and your work on the internet?
Oh, sure. My website is belladepaulo.com, BELLADEPAULO.com. No spaces or dots or anything. And on my website, you can find links to my Single at Heart book, different places to buy it. You can also find links to lots of my other work, my blog posts, and so forth.
Great. So thank you so much again for taking the time to come on the show. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. I've loved talking to you. Great questions.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, learning and development done differently. Check their website at enlights.com, and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters: Per Ergo Larsen, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sunda, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf Alex, Adam Kessel, Matthew Whittingford, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetri, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Michael Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Ford, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Cossen, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Librant, João Linhares, Stantantia, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardas France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Romain Roach, Diego Londonho Correia, Yannick Punter, Dana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavla Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Alman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeager, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Loaki, Georgios Theophanes, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry D. Lee Jr., Old Erringbon, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismael Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Jos Necht. A special thanks to my producers: Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Ugni, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, John Carlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.